Hello. Hi. Good evening. My name is Ivan. I'm the programs manager here at Beyond Baroque. Thank you all for being here tonight for this wonderful reading and conversation with Mathieu Cailler and Shonda Buchanan. Just a few words about Beyond Baroque and also brief land acknowledgement. We acknowledge our presence on ancestral and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples as the first peoples of this land. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous peoples through colonialism and genocidal practices. And as an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting their communities, stories, and cultures. Beyond Baroque has been here for 55 years. First, it started out as a storefront in Abbot Kinney, and then moved into the old Venice City Hall building in the late 70s. Every weekend, you can find us here with a variety of authors. Mostly we are hosting poetry readings, as well as exhibitions over in the Mike Kelly Gallery. We're currently in transition, so our walls are a blank canvas right now, but we are exhibiting the work of Gila Hirsch, and it's set to open next weekend. We are also currently accepting applications to the Linda J. Albertano Fellowship, named after the poet and performance artist. You can find more info about the fellowship on our website. It's open to women, non-binary poets and performance artists, especially. And you can also find some of the events that we'll be having in March, including a reading with Sam Sachs, Joyce Charles, and Safia Hilo, as well as a stage reading of playwright Beth Henley. And later in April, we are hosting the 3rd edition of the Poetry Film Festival, which will be on sale in just a few weeks. And we have a poetry and fiction workshop every week, Wednesdays and Mondays. Those happen on Zoom. So if you ever would like feedback on some of your work, whether it's in both of those genres, please join. They're currently being facilitated by, we have Raquel Baker in fiction and Ellie Johnson in poetry. Lastly, a huge thank you to the Beyond Baroque team, Eric Alberg, Jimmy in the bookstore, our directors Quentin and Michelle, and last shout out to you all and to our authors. I'm just gonna introduce both of the authors, read their brief bio so you know a little bit about them, but I'm sure you're all familiar with both of them. But Mathieu is the author of 7 books, 1 novel, 2 short story collections, 2 volumes of poetry, and 2 children's titles. His stories, poems, and essays have appeared in over 100 publications, including the Saturday Evening Post, the LA Times. He's the recipient of numerous awards, most notably the Shakespeare Award, the Short Story America Prize, the New England Book Festival, and the LA Times Book Festival Prize, and most recently the Paris Book Festival Prize. Shonda Buchanan is the author of 5 books, including the award-winning memoir Black Indian. Buchanan is also a faculty member in Almas College's MFA program in creative writing, award-winning poet, fiction, and nonfiction writer, and educator, finalist for the 2021 Mississippi Review Poetry Contest. Buchanan's memoir, Black Indian, won the 2020 Indie New Generation Book Award and was chosen by PBS NewsHour as a top 20 books to read. And also, her first collection of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians, was nominated for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and the Library of Virginia Book Awards. And Shonda is proudly serving as the president of the Board of Trustees here at Beyond Baroque. All right, so I'll leave it to you all. Please welcome them all. And thank you for the
I love the proudly piece. Yes, proudly president of the Board of Trustees. Oh, with the mics. Hello? Do I turn the mic on?
No, that was working.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for that, Yvonne, and thank you for being here, Shonda. my favorite place to read. This place had me back in 2015 when my first book came out, and nobody responded to emails, and I'll never forget it. So we're going to both, Shonda and I are going to present our books a little bit tonight. We're going to do a little reading and be in discussion on these little chairs with our little microphones. And, we're going to be talking about our books, about process. And at the end, if you will have any questions, we'll take those as well. So first thing, Shonda, can you tell us a little bit about your book? Maybe what made you write it? And share with the audience what makes it special.
Thank you for those questions. Black Indian came from my traumatic childhood. And, but also at the same time, this sense of erasure, like something that I didn't know. And I was always asking questions, and my mom and my family, essentially, they were just like, you ask too many goddamn questions, so I need you to stop asking questions. And that became my research question, in the academy. We was like, what's your research question? And my question was, why do we not know who our ancestors are? Why can I only go back to 2 or 3 grandparents, and I don't know where the rest came from. And so that's where this book came from. And then also at the same time, I was thinking about what it meant to grow up with the oral narrative of being African American and American Indian, and then also having some European in me, but they never showed up to the family reunion. So I don't know who those white people are in our family. So, yeah, but we were very fair-skinned. My mom could pass. My grandfather could pass. In fact, when my grandfather died, Grandpa Stafford, so on his birth certificate, it was Negro, and then on his death certificate, it was mulatto. But the reporter who came to report on his car accident death said that he was a Caucasian man who died with his Caucasian wife because he was married to a white woman. So there was just all this race and ethnicity stuff in my brain, and I needed to get it out in a book.
Yeah, did a great job.
Thank you.
It's an incredible memoir, and it bites off so much. I always think of writing as kind of like a archery target.
Yeah.
Like how far away are you from the target?
That's a great concept. I love that.
Like the harder the shot, right? Yeah. How far you are away makes the degree of difficulty impossible. Yeah. And are you able, but you hit the bullseye from, yards and yards and yards away.
I'm a Sagittarius.
Okay, good. Because when you read this, you go, wow, it's very historical.
Yeah.
Like I was saying to you on the couch over there.
Yeah.
I didn't know so much about this really brutal American history.
The Trail of Tears.
Correct.
And how American Indians owned slaves and how many slaves they had and racial classification. Yeah.
It was an interesting history lesson that is not a book that's necessarily historical first. It's also a personal memoir, but you learn so much through just reading pages, and then at the end you go, wow, I was never taught that. Yeah. I did not know that. And it really opened my eyes in so many ways. So,
I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the perfect reader. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I loved it. I was just saying earlier, I think it should be required reading in a lot of classrooms. I would like this a lot. Because there's something about reading something where they say, this is history class, learn your past, read chapter 4. It's like, it's okay, But when you read it and how it affects someone presently, and you think generationally, sometimes we think, like, Trail of Tears, Civil War, these things are so far in the past. But when you start to think generationally, you think, it's actually like 3 people ago, right? Exactly. And that's not that crazy. We know, like, my grandmother was here in 1920, and she knew, so you're getting really close to these areas. So I found that lineage very interesting. Yeah. Would you like to read us a question?
Oh, sure. I pulled out my questions too, just in case you were going to say, ask me a question. Okay, yes. I'll read the first, just in case.
I have this schedule.
Yes.
Extremely professional.
I was just being prepared.
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm such a nerd. Okay. So I'll read the first chapter. My editor, it's interesting, my editor said to me, one, you have too much history. You have to take out a couple of chapters. So I did. I have that for the next book. And then when I tried to make the first chapter a prologue, she said, "No, we're not going to make it a prologue. It's you're just going to go straight into the story. So this is it. Wait. To tell you any of these stories, I have to tell you the first, the very first. Somewhere in Mattawan, Michigan, there is an infant buried on top of a 13-year-old girl's grave. The infant, stillborn, was given a name anyway, but the wind buried the syllables under its cool tongue. The child's sutured eyes and never-kissed lips greeted that 1950s winter sky, the color of heron wings, when her father, my grandfather, opened another hole in the mute earth and laid his second unforgiving child's body to rest in her sister's slender waiting arms. Finally, someone to hold. Frida shifted and yawned into the earth. Together there, my two aunts, the virgin and the infant, kept each other safe. They shared the secret of each other's bones, and there were lots of secrets. Maybe I am the unborn child. Perhaps she returned in me to tell our story from my woman child's hands, Velma Jean's daughter's hands, fourth girl child's hands, since we are after all the baby girls, and at once the sixth seed. We both prefer the dint of rain in the earth to the din of voices, the fists, the liquor laughs, screams at family gatherings. Equally, we cherish our silence. And if I am her, what did I see hovering over the farm before that last mound of dirt covered me? What would I say first? Maybe something about the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe, building wigwams on the riverbanks, before French trappers, missionaries, and settlers came. Something about Mama's sweet cornbread and Daddy's cold beer. The 5 little burnished yellow Mattawan fairies, mulatto skin, Pocahontas eyes. I would take you to the field, to Wolf Lake, to the bait house, push you in the tire swing, laced to the top branch of the weeping willow in the front yard, push you until you were dizzy, and then I would say it. What I don't know, I can't tell. So there's a lot of mystery in that. Lots of mystery. And I can keep reading or just we can talk about it, or it's up to you.
What would you like? I can go either way.
Yeah.
I think I'll ask a few questions here. So first, what you were saying about the history and all that, and I think addressing the reader kind of, and also the past here, is a very kind of bold choice. Is this the book, kind of when it was germinating, because it's very interesting, the writing process, what you have in your brain and then what you end up putting on the page can be two kind of different things. Is this the book, because it's, you know, it's history, love, family, friendship, it's tender, poignant, and funny. Like surprisingly, shockingly funny at times where you go, oh wow, this is really great that this was also included.
Remember we were talking, I had to include some humor because it's so dense.
Yeah.
And so I had to make people laugh a little.
I think it was really, it was great. And so did you kind of accomplish what you set out for in your mind when you pulled this off?
I think I did. That's a great question. I had been writing portions of the book in journal entries with that question. And so the first chapter that I read comes from a journal entry, really. And so when I went back to make this the first chapter, it was like, okay, you actually have all that poetry, poetic language, but you have narrative, a beginning, a middle, and an end in this chapter. I think it's okay. You know, it's okay that you are pulling a journal entry to be the first piece, and it set the tone. It set the tone for the book. It set the tone for the questions. It set the tone for the history, for what was known and what was not known. And I think it allowed for the rest of it to unfold. As a writer yourself, you know, there's got to be like an underlying or, you know, something at the beginning that hints at what the book, you know, will be about. So of course I tell my grandfather's story in this book. My grandfather was very, he's the person that everyone was afraid of at family reunions or wherever, you always like, where's that punch gonna come from? So that's my grandpa. So I told his story, and I told my mom's story, my aunts. So it was a lot of like that unearthing of family stories. And I interviewed them to get their stories. And then I feel like, yes, I did do what I set out to do because I've got their voices, their lives, and then I also have the history that created their social status as mulattoes, as mixed bloods in the Midwest. And something else I talk about in the book is that my family are some of the first free people of color to settle Indiana and then Michigan. And in fact, my Roberts got on the trail from North Carolina, moving from Tennessee to Indiana, and then stopped in Indiana, but they were following the Quakers trail. So whenever I meet a Quaker, I'm like, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to follow. And then also thank you for trading with my family, because that's how we created our first communities. So I think, yes, to answer your question, I set out to do what I wanted to do.
That's great. Was it strange kind of interviewing family members for something that sometimes, were they okay with what would be portrayed? Or because I'm sure there's people in here that have memoirs in their hearts and brains.
Who has a memoir that they're writing? Anyone? Is anyone right? Who has a memoir they want to write but are too afraid of what your family will say? Aha! Yes, yeah. Family can be the thing that stops the narrative and the story.
Sure.
What was it like interviewing my people? I'm the least of storytellers in my family. Everyone else is like fall down funny, like hilarious. I'm the least, really. I'm just the one who put it on paper. And it's sometimes it's like, oh my God, that was so funny. And other times like, oh my God, that's so painful. Why did you just say that thing? And we're all laughing anyway as we're like dying, losing our breath. So yeah, I forgot the question because I'm thinking of some jokes my family would tell.
That's fine. No, were they were okay?
Interviewing the family members. My mom was reticent, and she said to me, I'm not going to talk to you about your father, my dad. And I was like, but mommy, I'm the seed. She's like, still, those are my stories. My aunt, my favorite aunt, Aunt Irma, was like, she talked and talked and talked and talked. I had so many like recordings of her. One of my other aunts, Aunt Mildred, who has since died, and Aunt Phyllis, she's the aunt who died, and this is where I start the book. But Aunt Phyllis, I couldn't talk to her because she had passed, and then Aunt Phyllis, Aunt Mildred, a lot of aunts. Aunt Mildred just straight up lied. Like when I interviewed her, I've got it on tape. I mean, she was like, "No, my daddy, he never cheated on on my mama." And I was like, there is so much evidence to the contrary, Aunt Mildred. So I just took her story with a grain of salt.
Sure.
And then my favorite aunt said, take your mother on a ride around Kalamazoo and Mattawan, and just tell her that you've got your recording in your, on your pocket or your pouch. So I had a recording in my sweatshirt, my LMU sweatshirt. I graduated from LMU. I was like, I remember. And I said, Mommy, I'm going to record this as we drive. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. And then she talked and talked about the one-room schoolhouse where she grew up, and she talked about her mother braiding her hair when she was a kid and walking in the snow in Michigan. And like, I got all of these stories, and I there's a section in here where I'm blending that drive with something that happened traumatic to my mom. And then I talk about what a terrible daughter I am, that I'm asking her questions about her past and her history. And it hurts, for some people to remember these things. The other side of that moment is my mom was trying to write her stories, and she literally had, I remember this when I was in high school, she had a stack of paper that she typed up with her experiences. Her husband found them and confronted her, and she burned it. I remember that. And so this is her retribution, and she carries it with her, and she's like, my daughter wrote this book, even though she hasn't read she read the manuscript, but she hasn't opened this. She carries it around, and she's like, my daughter wrote this book about the family.
Yeah, because it's a gift to your family in a lot of ways for generations to come. Yeah. And a gift to citizens of I mean, everywhere, but Kalamazoo, I didn't understand the history of Kalamazoo. It's an interesting name.
Key Kalamazoo.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of see the proximity. It's not far from kind of right around the lake there.
Yeah.
But I had no idea.
We're right here.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone from Michigan?
Mitten or the
That's
other
right.
side. Yeah.
First time I was in, what do you keep doing with your hand? Oh, I see. Yeah, the state does look like a little bit. Yeah, that is cute. I'm going to read a selection of something I found amazing for my next question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is from chapter 18. My earliest memory is of running. Like lifting a rock to find the underside of a sparkling prism, I uncovered my smallest self, arms and elbows flaying, the taste of black Michigan soil gliding into my mouth, slapping my cheeks and embedding itself in my hair as I skidded around the house, across the backyard, and toward the gaping barn. I was always grimy and smelly. My mother made me wash my feet every night before I went to bed, smelling like a wildflower rank with wind and all of the day's heat. I didn't care. At 5, when I ran, the black ground seemed to rush up to meet me, then disappear. My knees folded into my body like waterfowl feathers, and I almost felt as though I was lifting up, barely letting my feet touch what I knew was there, but never looked down to see. I just love that passage.
That's so good.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I know, I read that this morning as kind of a refresher, and it's kind of starred some of my favorite passages. And I know your background as a poet is, you have a new poetry collection coming out soon, other poetry collections, which we'll talk about later. But talk about how maybe your love of poetry influences your prose. Because I got a lot of that in there, That broken into stanzas could be very, into lines, could be put into stanzas, and et cetera. So.
That's how I see the world. Mm-hmm. I see the world in imagery, and I see the world in colors and shapes and smells and sounds. And I'm an empath as well. And so sometimes when we met at Alma College when you were giving your talk, and I think I was sick, right, at a certain point.
Yeah.
And I think because I can only take so much of like a room full of people, and then I'm like, okay, I need to go and quiet myself down, because I'm always writing in my head, or I'm always seeing the imagery or seeing someone's story. If I'm talking to you, I can have your story in 5 minutes, like literally your whole family history. I would know your genealogy. So that becomes a lot, when you're writing. And so I think, my poet mouth, that's what my journalism teacher used to call it my poet. You have poet mouth. And that poet mouth is always there for me. So even when I'm writing something, I'm working on so the collection of Nina Simone poetry. How many of you know who Nina Simone is? Yay! So I have been working on that collection little by little for 10 years. I guess that's what I write in 10-year swaths. This is a 10-year book, and the collection of Nina Simone poetry is 10 years as well. Unearthing Her Life, that comes out in February. Of course, it's a book of poetry, Poet Mouth. My second memoir that I'm working on, and we were talking about this sitting over there. So I wrote the draft, and now I'm going back to craft. And so that's the poet mouth that I'm looking for, is right. I need to pull people in, no matter where they come from, no matter what their age is, no matter their orientation. You know what I mean? It's like, so I want people to see those stories and feel those stories as if they are a part of the stories, even though I'm African American, American Indian, woman, heterosexual grandma. I want people to enter those stories and be able to be there no matter where they come from. So that's why
well
I write
said.
That way.
You're right. Because senses do, you become that character right away.
Yeah.
It touches to, I think, any kid who's played for a long summer day.
Exactly.
And you just, we were talking over there too about writing a middle grade book of a young girl. And I was like, the black dirt, I have something, I wouldn't have put it as poetic as this, because this is just astounding. But I was like, oh, that's kind of the mindset I was trying to enter, this exact type of, summer energy.
Yeah. Can I tag it into a question for you?
Yeah.
Because this my first question actually speaks a little bit about that beautiful collection of short stories, by the way, Forest for the Trees. And my question is, why did you create a collection of short stories with this book as opposed to a novel? Because I'm really curious about that piece, because I see the thread. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I see the thread of family, of motherhood, fatherhood, birth in the book, and I was like, oh, this could have been a novel. Yeah. So I'm curious about that, and then also talk maybe about the writing.
Sure.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think. Let's see. So. Yeah, with this book, Forest for the Trees, it's a collection of 50.
And congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I love the book.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, that's a great question. I think anything can be stretched novel-wise, but for some reason, with these particular characters and stories, I just saw them in kind of flashes in terms of their stories, the plots, and I'm really attracted to the short story. I think in general, it's a shame it's not more popular, but I think maybe it'll come around. Who knows, It was this staple of history for a long time, and it seems to have gone away, and magazines that used to carry short stories rather, I think only like the New Yorker, maybe Harper's, those two remain, right?
What about Elle and Cosmos? I read a lot of short stories with them, yeah.
I know, when I read like an old Hemingway, and if it's an older version, it'll have, this was first published in Cosmopolitan.
Right,
like, what? The same one?
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine sending like a story about hunting to Cosmo.
You never know though.
But it's like kind of crazy, and I remember Kurt Vonnegut published a romantic short story called A Long Walk Forever.
I know that.
And I always loved that short story, and I found out it was originally published in Redbook. And I was like, wow, that's so funny.
A lot of housewives.
Makes sense. Yeah. Those were kind of the backbone of those magazines back in the day. So
what people talk about when they talk about love is one of my favorite short stories.
Anything Carver's probably, that's right. Chris and I have similar author heroes. We have a few. So I think the short story for me is the immediacy I'm very attracted to. That you kind of arrive late, leave early.
Yeah.
You just drop into someone's life during a difficult spot, and they don't really have a resolution.
Yeah.
You walk away maybe a little unsure of what's next, but I find it very organic and very true to life. And I think also I had just finished a novel in 2020, and I didn't want to see that for a while. Like that was just a long journey, and it's just, it's all, it's very exhausting, the novel. It's like a lot to hold all those people in your head for years. And the short story, you're like, it's very quick in the sense you're living with these characters for a few months maybe, trying to get their story down, and then you're on to something new, a different character, a different plight, different backstory. So to answer your question. But I think sometimes about fleshing out some of these into something longer,
the thing that I wanted to ask you about is your use of flashback, and then how the use of flashback becomes integral to a lot of a lot of the stories in the book.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Chris asked a good question about that at Skylight. That's
right. Nice.
And I kind of revised my answer because I realized it wasn't very good at Skylight, so I'm ready now.
Oh, good. Chris, we're in cahoots.
I think for me, like motivation is key. Motivation is what gets you to buy any story and root for anyone. So, I think of like when I talk to students, I talk about Breaking Bad, how, you're rooting for a drug dealer. It's a drug kingpin. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, I'm about to destroy it, so, or ruin it for you, I mean. But you had like 20 years, so it's okay. So you just, because of the backstory, because of the way you're manipulated, essentially, you are rooting for this this teacher. And so when he becomes kind of this great guy, and you just start going like, that sounds about right. Like teachers should get paid a little bit more, And you start completely...
And then he gets cancer.
Yeah, that's right. and then his healthcare, and you're like, you know what, he has to do what he has to do. Like, that's how it works. And so for me, it's a little bit of understanding backstory to get you to buy in, get to establish a little bit of the psychology behind a character, and also I think it allows kind of two threads, a little bit like, a memoir where it's just not enough to tell the story of your family maybe, and if you were to do that, you'd say, I could do something bigger here. So by intertwining the history or whatever, I think like writing also just needs like a braid. You need a few threads to weave together. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Did you want to read it?
Sure, I'll read a little something. Why not? I'm going to read from the title story, Forest for the Trees. Thank you for your questions. Those were good. I'm surprised I haven't dropped something yet. I feel like it's going to happen. But the mic is good. I think I got it together. All right. Forest for the Trees. What's that? Emily turned Caleb's way and knocked a pillow to the floor. She said it again. Caleb said, half asleep. That noise, Emily said. She placed her hand on Caleb's chest. Do you hear that? Caleb took a second, rubbed his eyes, and worked his tongue around his mouth. It's just the wind, sweetie, or a raccoon. I've seen lots of them around lately. He opened one eye and took in what he could. Emily was sitting up in bed, both her hands in tight fists, craning her head back and forth. Just relax, baby. Go back to sleep. Even though it was only early November, winter had already arrived, announcing its presence last week with a snowstorm and consistent below-freezing temperatures. Just then, a gust swooped through the White Mountains and rattled the roof of their secluded cabin. The long-tongued draft agitated the remaining flames in the nearby Franklin stove, inducing a succession of machine gun pops that startled them both. You're right, Emily said. Maybe it is just the wind. She dropped back into the sheets. A minute passed, and Caleb tried to get comfortable. He tossed and turned and lined his gaze with the ceiling. Moonlight broke through a slit in the drapes, forming a white Rorschach-style blot on the ceiling that resembled an M16 rifle, the weapon he'd carried while serving in Afghanistan. Go long! A football spiraling across the sky, Sergeant Wiggins going deep, a landmine, Wiggins' femur poking through bloodied skin, Caleb scooping him up, waving down a Humvee in the distance, feeling warm blood wash over his arms. Caleb, do you hear that? What? For Christ's sake, the noise, that noise! Caleb sat up and took a peek toward the doorway at the opposite end of the room. There was a figure there, its silhouette tall and strong, backlit by what little light the Franklin stove's embers had left to offer. Emily stared in the direction of the figure, most likely believing that everything was fine because Caleb was still. When her eyes made sense of the person in the doorway, she didn't scream. She trembled. As the bed shook beneath them, Caleb wedged himself tightly against Emily and wrapped his arm around her quivering stomach. He then reached for her hand, but her fingers were too rigid to be held. Don't move, the man said. His voice was deep and soft, hard to hear with the wind whirring outside. No Superman shit. Just stay there, both of you. Stuttered breaths escaped Emily's mouth, one after the other, and Caleb's heartbeat sped up, switching from sleeping rhythm to a jogging-like clip. Please, Caleb said, just don't hurt us. Take whatever you like. We don't have much. I'm a park ranger and my wife's a painter. Shut up. The man was still camouflaged by the darkness. He hadn't moved an inch. None of his features were visible. Caleb went on. There's a shoebox in the closet with some cash in it. It's all yours. Please, just don't hurt my wife. Don't hurt us. The room was still. There were only Emily's trembling wheezes and the scraping of an animal on the roof, long claws ripping at the shingles. It's very simple, the man said. His voice was steady and monotone, softening at the end of each sentence as if he was bored. Do as I say. If you don't, I'll kill you both. First thing I want you to do is get out of bed and walk with me to the living room. Can you do that? Neither Emily nor Caleb answered, so the man raised his voice and repeated the question. Yes, they both said in unison. Good. Emily tugged on Caleb's arm. She needed him. He'd managed to avoid capture during his 6 years of duty, but he knew plenty who hadn't, and the ones who'd made it out always said the best thing to do was make the aggressors feel as if they were in total control. The man clicked on the hallway light, and Caleb and Emily's eyes adjusted to the brightness. They took him in. He was tall, wearing jeans and a navy hooded sweatshirt. He had a stocking cap pulled over his face, with holes cut out for his dark eyes and small mouth. "Pretty stupid of you," he said, pointing at Caleb. "Put your gun cabinet by the entrance." He yanked a nickel-plated six-shooter, a pistol Caleb had purchased a few weeks ago, from the waist of his jeans and pointed the barrel their way. He led them both into the living room, where he clicked on another lamp. He licked his teeth and made them both sit on the couch. Again, the fire popped, and the cold wind pummeled the house. A green duffel lay on the floor, and the man pulled a tangle of rope from it, straightened Caleb's from it. Caleb straightened his spine, and the man pointed the gun at his head. "Whoa. What'd I say about being Superman?" The man looked in the direction of Caleb's gaze and noticed 2 cell phones charging on a coffee table. He stepped backward, continuing to point the gun in their direction. When he finally reached the table, he turned and smashed both phones with the gun. He continued long after the shards of glass screens and pieces of plastic were strewn about the carpet, just beating the table, metal on wood, a solid pounding that brought Caleb back to the desert, with Wiggins screaming, "Don't let me die, Caleb. Please don't let me die." "Landline," the man said. "Your landline, where is it?" "Right there," Emily said, "behind you, in the kitchen." She could barely get the words out, and when she did, her whole body convulsed. The man backed up slowly, his gun pointed directly at them, alternating between their 2 bodies every few seconds. He clobbered the phone with the heel of the gun. Then he strolled back to Caleb and Emily, humming a tune, a high note, and then a low note. I'll stop there. Thank you.
So I don't want to spoil the ending of that, but I want to ask, how long did it take you to write that particular story? And then at the end, when did you come up with the ending?
Oh, good question.
How many people have read the whole book? Wife, yes. Moms, parents, yep. So the whole book,
The people I annoyed the most.
Yeah.
What was the first part?
How long did it take to write that particular story, and when did you come up with it?
Yeah, that one took a while. I would say from moment of conception till the end, maybe 3 months, where it felt good.
Yeah.
And then the ending, it's a great question. It kind of came to me as I wrote and I don't want to ruin it, but I would say, as I wrote the original ending, I said, something could be far more interesting. I think I have something else. Let's see if that works.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, now I just need to sharpen some things, earlier and stuff like that. So yeah.
I'm a whodunit guesser. Like I can usually guess at the first 30 seconds of a movie who did it.
Yeah.
So what was it, The Usual Suspects?
Oh, yeah.
I knew exactly who did it, right? And so I didn't guess at the end of it. So I didn't guess the ending. So that's a great, that could be actually a movie.
I think, it's so funny you said that, because that's my next project after the middle grade book. I'm going to probably this summer try to flesh that one out into a film. I think it would be fun.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that'll be a great one.
It's got a lot of, I think with writing, it's such a balance of internal drama and external drama. And sometimes short stories are hard to adapt because it's so internal, right? Like the first story in the book is about a priest. And it's an interesting short story. I don't think it would make a good film, because it would have to be like all voiceover or something. You'd have to get kind of weird with it.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of external drama, but there's something at stake, and the character wants something. So but every now and then, that one felt very cinematic to me as I was writing it. A lot of detail, and. It felt like I could.
And then several turns. There's several turns. There's the weaving again.
Yeah, the weaving.
Him being an army, ex-army, ex-soldier. No, you're never an ex-soldier, but him being a soldier.
Yeah.
And then the feeling about the wife.
Yeah.
And then how he feels. I'm going to spoil a little bit. How he feels like the wife isn't quite attracted to him because he's no longer.
Correct.
In soldier.
Yeah, and I had that experience.
Yeah.
I had met a guy at the gym who had said that to me. That was a little bit how it started.
Wow.
A veteran who kind of said, hey, when, he was just being very honest. We were chatting about writing.
Yeah.
Often when you tell people you're a writer, people tell you they want to write. And So I always ask what they'd like to write about, and he was going to do a memoir about kind of PTSD and his, he felt like once he got back, just the world was so slow.
Yeah,
and it's true. It's like, I don't know what that's like, but you imagine it's just a very intense environment.
Right.
And then when you go back and this guy's working as a park ranger, there's just a little bit of a
difference.
Yeah, a huge difference in terms of what's at stake and your energy getting up. And so, that was a little bit kind of when he said, oh, even my relationships with my friends, my wife, like I was this hero.
Yeah.
I was this guy who kind of had a lot of power, and now I'm just someone who goes to buy bread.
Right.
And it's taking a while. I have like shopping lists, and I have these kind of menial tasks I have to take care of.
That's amazing that you gave voice to, an entire subculture where they might want to write their own stories and they're not able to write the stories. I know that there actually is a organization that deals with the writing of soldier stories, and I think it's called Warriors Writing or something along those lines. At any rate, but that was wonderful for you to give voice to that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I have a lot of questions, so I don't want to hog the...
We can kind of ping pong.
Okay.
You want one now?
I don't want to...
Give you
Sure.
one. Did you find writing your book, like, was it healing at all? Or was it kind of wound opening? And a little bit, maybe both.
It was both, yeah. There was a moment when I was researching the book. I live in Playa del Rey now, but this was in 2000. When was I because I lived in Playa del Rey, moved to Virginia to work at Hampton University for 13 years, and then a couple of stops, and I came back to LA. So there was a moment I was researching the book, and I had two pieces of research in my hand, and it hit me. I was like, wait, I had two groups of people who were both in Holocausts. So the African Holocaust with the Middle Passage, African slaves, enslaved Africans who were transported from Africa throughout the world, right? South America, Central America, North America, some parts of Europe. And then the indigenous people of America, the American Indians, and their Holocaust was many things, but starting in 1812, I'm not going to get all the history, but 1812, and then the Trail of Tears, became one of the most traumatic moments in history. And I started crying, literally. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then when I first did my DNA with 23andMe, this is interesting. One of my ancestors apparently was a full-blood Ashkenazi Jewish person. I was like, who is that? And then as they did more, that Ashkenazi Jew fell off of my thing. But I was like, so where'd you go? It's so interesting. So then I'm thinking, okay, so we know if we go back far enough, all of our people have had something happen to them, right? I mean, that's the nature of conquer and divide. But at that moment, I was like, how am I going to get this, into the book? And every time I read some sections, I'm always tearing up because it's almost as if I'm still right there, like writing it and living that memory of the writing. So, yes, it was traumatic and then also healing, because if you don't say a thing, you're always going to live with the taste of it in the back of your mouth, in the memory. When you start calling a thing or writing a thing or saying a thing, that's when the healing begins. I mean, that's like going into a Catholic, into a church, to a priest to say, Father, I have sinned, and I need to tell you my story. And the telling of that story becomes a moment where, okay, at least I shared this with someone, absolution. And for me, the writing is a bit like that. I've never even made that like analogy. I've never made that comparison.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
But it is the telling and the writing of stories becomes a healing balm, I think, for the people, for the writer, and then also other people who are reading it. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. I've had many people come up to me and say, oh my God, you wrote my story. My great-grandfather is a Cherokee or a Choctaw or, indigenous person who couldn't claim his ethnicity because his people were on the Trail of Tears and they couldn't get on the Dawes rolls. I mean, there's just so much, relating to the book and the history and family stories that people have, and no one has written it yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
we say the term many times like African American, but it's vague in a lot of ways, right?
Yes.
You kind of make it much sharper in terms of what exactly does that look like?
Right.
Identity in terms of what's American, what is my African heritage, right? So that I found very interesting as well, because I did not know so many of the tribes. You know? That's like another thing. There's so many interesting tribes and how they were just a huge part of
culpable,
history.
right?
Yes, and also
one trying to save themselves with trying to assimilate. So the 5 civilized tribes in the southeast of our country, of North America, cut their hair, started wearing Western clothing in the 1800s, moving into the 1900s. And because they wanted to assimilate and keep their land, they saw what was happening with Manifest Destiny. And along with that assimilation, they started owning African slaves, black slaves. And I have a statistic in here. I think the Cherokee were the ones who owned the most black slaves, and those slaves went with them on the Trail of Tears. So I think it was like 15,000.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, 15,000. I think the Cherokee had over 15,000 black slaves. And then the Creek and the Choctaw and the Seminole had black slaves too, but there were more like family relations in that nation as well. I call them nations. I don't call them tribes. I call them nations because they were nations. At any rate, so that's a statistic that was just mind blowing to me.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's see, I got one more. Oh, this is kind of a generic question, but something I was thinking about the other day. What's a lesson from your writing life that you've been able to apply to other facets?
Well, I'm slingshot that to you too.
Oh, good. Okay.
Listening.
That's good.
Being able to listen when someone is telling you their story, and it's not just about you, who you are. It's about the listening because they need to save their life. Like you're listening to their story, they're telling you something, and it's a moment where you need to that's it, just listen. And for me, the writing is, let me just listen. Okay, let me just pause right here and write what needs to be said here. So for me, listening is something that I take from the writing. How about for you?
That's a great one. I think for me, I'm an impatient person. So I've learned that it's great to see like pages pile up with daily work.
Yeah.
You know, even if you're just writing like 500 words a day or 1,000 words a day or a couple pages, you can kind of say like, oh, in 6 months, this will be something. And there's a little bit of that with so many goals you have for yourself where you say, oh, just like you know, tomorrow's you will be grateful you started today.
Right.
Right. So I think that I try to take that in all sorts of disciplines now where you say, oh, I'm not very good at this now, but maybe if I stick with it and just do a little bit every day, whether it's, you know, a walk or working out or trying to cook or whatever it is, right? You can kind of get there relatively quick. I think life is, we have this thing, we say life is short, but it's actually quite long.
It's true.
Like, if you've ever done a plank or brushed your teeth, it's like pretty long. So you're kind of like, it's good to know what you're doing and work hard to make sure you've created the life you wanted.
Yeah.
If you don't, there's time to move in a different direction. It's pretty long. Yeah.
Which of the stories in your book are your favorite stories? Oh, no, I shouldn't say that because it's like choosing a favorite child.
That's all right.
Okay, yeah.
No, they're all, like you said, they're all kind of children. I think the ones I'm like most, first of all, like, I like them all. You know, I wouldn't have them in the book if I didn't think they were ready for public reading. But I know what you mean. There's always some stuff, like the paragraph I read, you said, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
You know, when it kind of sits for a while, I remember I hadn't really touched this book in a long time, and I picked it up to edit and stuff, and I thought, oh, I like these stories. Like, I'm finding myself enjoying my own work, which is very rare.
Yes.
But I hadn't read The Father, the story about the priest that opens the book. I hadn't read that in some 7 years before we got to editing. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I would have written it the same way now. You become a different writer, like year to year almost. But I said, oh, I like kind of where I took that story. And so I'd say I like Forest for the Trees, the title story, because it was new for me in terms of having that kind of external conflict and like really a thriller. It's not usually the kind of stuff I write. There's also a story that's narrated from the point of view of a rifle at the end of the book. So I did something a little bit different for me and not a human character. Kind of a dare to myself.
Personification,
you know, like, I'm going to try to do something. It's actually Sophronia who wrote a piece from the point of view of a Whig in our workshop long ago at Vermont. And it kind of always sat in my mind. Like, I assign this to students to write a story from the point of view of an inanimate object, and I don't do it. I'm kind of a fraud. Like, they're asking me, oh, this is hard. Like, what would you do? And I'm like, I don't know, because I've never done it. That's it. Like, I'm going to not be a fraud. I'll try this. And so that one, when it's executed the way I liked it, I was like, okay, that worked. And there's a story told a little bit, again, from an inanimate object, but it's not really the same way as the rifle. It's just it's told through the odometer of a family car, a 1955 DeSoto, and kind of like how this classic car stays with this family through generations, and how, you know, these objects in our lives end up having a lot of relevance, and they're kind of these silent witnesses to so much. And so that one I kind of, you know, we were talking about the target earlier. That one felt like, oh, nice, I hit the bullseye from where I was standing. That was an exciting moment. That kind of stuff is always exciting as a writer.
How about the story? I want to ask. This is a two-part question, so I shouldn't say that. I don't want to spill the beans, but there's a story with a teacher, and the title is just blanking. The teacher, the woman who's.
I think, right? Is that the one?
Yeah, she's a teacher.
SHH.
Yes.
It's like a weird one to say, but in print it's just...
she's a teacher. And what about that story? Is that...
Oh, yeah, that one's up there.
And...
It was long and...
What was it like to write in a woman's POV?
Oh, I like writing from women's POV kind of a lot. I know it's kind of like in 2024, everyone's like, stick to what you know, don't cross over. There's a lot of discussion. But... so far, no one has said that I've been totally out of my mind or anything. It started a little bit, I have a few stories in this book, I think. Yeah, there's at least 2 or 3. My novel is like 4 characters kind of cycled, and one of them is a mom. I like it. I spent a lot of time growing up with my grandma and my mom and learning like all sorts of, I felt very comfortable in that. My narrator for my middle grade book is a 13-year-old girl, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm kind of, I like jumping around. I like doing it. I like kids. I love writing from kids' point of view. I like switching it up, and I think for a reader it's fun. You pick up a collection, and you're like, okay, first story, priest. Second, an Army veteran who's been through quite a lot, who's now reassimilating. Third story is an older woman who's at a diner with her strange husband, and you know, he's kind of an ornery fellow, and they're, and so I kind of like jumping around. I think it gives a little bit of a freshness to the book.
So that leads to the other question. I can see that you were raised close to women in the because usually as a feminist myself, I'm like, how did he write that? You know, how did he tell that woman's story? So I can see that. But then also, I'll make sure I'm asking the question correctly.
I mean, I think, not to cut you off, but I think it's important when you do write, you do get feedback from, you know, whatever group you're trying. So you don't, and I often would workshop things like that, and I would have, there's this one woman in my workshop that'd be like, women would never say this, you know?
Okay, good.
So that's like something you have to work, or like women don't call their, I remember one specific detail, like this girl unbuttoned her pants or something, and the woman in the workshop said, women don't call it a fly, we call it a zipper.
That's
you
true.
Know, or like button my zipper, like, you know, stuff like that. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, these are really helpful notes, right? So
you had great
cycling
readers.
It through great readers and being like, hey, be honest. Does this, even with a kid, you know, does this sound like a kid? Does a kid say this? There's some leeway, but it's nice to hear, because it can really, that can throw you off, right? Like,
So I asked this with the veteran story, but are any of the other stories based off of real life experiences? Okay, I'll stop there.
I think so. I think every story in this book has real life experience in some way, shape, or form, right? Like the priest story was something I've always been kind of intrigued by, the priesthood. I was an altar boy at a French church for like a little bit of time, and I went in this back room and saw the priests get dressed. And it was like kind of, it's ceremonial. When you're a little kid, it's just very intriguing. Like all these little boxes, and they're probably like sacrilegious to call it a box, but like
the Eucharist, is that the Eucharist? I don't know what that is.
It's just like there's like the tabernacle, like all the stuff in the altar is for public viewing when you go, but also like behind the scenes, there's like a whole little room where everyone gets ready, and the priest puts on his alb, and it's a big deal. My
father was a Baptist preacher, so I saw a lot of that for him, like putting on the stole and the black, and just becoming a different person.
Yeah, and when you're like 7, 8 years old, and it was just very, I remember the first time someone had just called in sick or something, so I didn't even know what I was doing, and my father and I laughed about it later on because like the priest raised his hands, and I thought, all right, and so I did it as well. And then I looked around, and like the other altar boy was just, and you know what I mean? So just things like that where you just go like, oh God. And then I had to carry like a crucifix, and it was really heavy. And I remember being like, oh, please, like if I drop this, I don't know what happens, but I know it's not good. So just being kind of in that world, I wasn't a priest, obviously, but it made me feel like I could write about it a little bit. And also just writing a story that is not what we think of now, like the Catholic priesthood has kind of obviously exactly, right? So writing something a little bit different from what we've become kind of accustomed to hearing, and kind of talking about sacrifice, or locations inspire me a lot. So there's a barbershop up north in Point Reyes I passed by. I thought it was just a weird barbershop. Ended up being the setting of a story. I spent a week in Memphis as like a visiting professor, wrote a story called Office Hours just based on a little bit of the weirdness I saw. So it always ends up, I think absolutely every story I can say like, oh, I know what germinated to create it, or I was a part of it, or I heard someone say something,
No, that gives me hope, because maybe I should turn my second memoir into a collection of short stories.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, I could do that.
Yeah. It's a lot easier, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it is.
Because then the research is, you have it in your head, but you can kind of modify however you want.
I can make people say what I want.
Whenever I read a book like yours, I just go, my God, the research. Like, it blows me away. It's really, because you're writing an entire book before you even sit down. You have to have so much knowledge of, it's a historical lens through which you write the book. And you want to be very accurate to the nations. You want to do everyone the justice they deserve. So,
and there's the family technique as well. And I said the family technique, but the technique of taking people's story and then turning that into a fictionalized version of what happened.
Absolutely.
Which is, the techniques that I teach my students is if you don't know what someone said exactly, you could always say, I imagine in that moment they said this.
Oh, that's smart.
Or I imagine in the moment that she felt this. The only stories that I heard were these, but as a child of 10, this could have been what she felt.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, because that's true.
So it's like a trick of the pen.
That's smart. Well, I noticed what you do, too, to start chapters a lot. You'll have dialogue. Which I think is so cool in a memoir, because it's, I don't know, dialogue works. It's kind of hard to weave dialogue through essays and nonfiction, because people go like, oh, did you have a tape recorder with you or whatever? But it kind of charges your narrative and gives it a lot of energy, which I think is great. You start, and then Jim said, or you know what I mean? It's just very intriguing. So I thought it was interesting. I went through, I think it counted, that you did it through a lot of the chapters, and I thought it gave good energy.
I did, thank you. I was just thinking about microphone. There's a section here, this is the dialogue part, but this, I guess I actually went and wrote what happened. This is my sister when we were in the car, and I say, my sister and I were trying to go and save my nephew's job, and I got embroiled in what I call the dynamic duo drive. So here's a piece of the dialogue. Can I read a little? Oh, okay, sorry. So this is a little bit of the what happened. Racing down Oakland Drive at a breakneck speed to take my recalcitrant nephew his work clothes. Rochelle glances at me sideways. Nervous, she wipes perspiration from her face. She wants a cigarette, but knows I'd pitch a bitch fit if she smoked one. Grandma Dorothy's cancer killed her. Rochelle wants, I can tell, to feed her anxiety and anger the way she used to years ago. A hot silver spoon pooling with perfect crystal, with mind-numbing liquid. But she's clean now, today, this week. Is that too much air? She flicks the switch off for the 5th time. Still, she needs something, to say something, do something. I'm going to skip down to the more dialogue. How's your boyfriend? She fiddles with her lighter. What's his name? Who? I suck my teeth. This sister is about to be single. He ain't man enough. How's your husband? Who? Girl, that shit done come and gone. He couldn't handle this. Honey, you still crazy as all get out. We burst into nervous laughter, our relationships frayed, lives tattered, but it feels good, like old times. Rochelle protected me as much as she could when she was growing up, though our family possessed tremendously effective inquisition-like tormenting skills, our only true inheritance. She quietly ushered me through my own 30-yard dash as a teenage alcoholic, the summer before I left home after high school, without a word to Mama. Rochelle would break someone's face for me. Now I wish I could protect her like that. And so there's more dialogue and more story. But when you talked about the dialogue piece, it was just so important for a memoir, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it gives just dialogue. It breaks up pages. It gives a little white space, levity, and it moves your narrative along. And you get to know people.
Exactly.
That scene is funny. You get to know.
And the parlance. So we were talking about memoir, and you said, I don't know if any memoirs, that I need to read more memoir because memoirs aren't funny. So I'm going to go to Mary Karr's The Liars Club. And has anyone read Mary Karr's The Liars Club? So she's so funny. Yeah, it's her first book, and she said she wrote it because she needed money. So yeah, they were like, she was a single mom, and she's like, I really needed money, so I wrote the book. She's got 2 other memoirs, but that one is so funny, and there's some trauma in it.
Yeah.
There was a moment when I was laughing and crying at the same time because the craft was so stellar.
What's it called again?
The Liars Club.
Liars Club. You recommended a book of fiction called The Only Good Indian?
The Only Good Indian.
That was such a good book.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
it's so scary.
It was a horror thriller.
Yeah, it's a horror thriller. Yeah, I would love to not watch the movie because I'm a scaredy cat.
Is there a movie?
I don't know if that movie's coming out, but True Detective is a little bit like that on Hulu. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed it though. So that was the last time we got together. I said I have to bring that up. But yeah, does anybody have any questions for us? Chris, my old friend Chris. He's I love him. He's very good. Reliable Chris.
I wanted to ask about both of you about outlining. Before you sit down to write, it's important that you have like a path, that you have things organized before you get going. Or do you see that as a possible barrier or something that might stifle your activity?
That's a great question. You want to take it?
No, go ahead.
Okay. A little bit of both, I think. Like, I personally like to have some game plan, but it's extremely loose because I think, like you said, you can get a little wedded to it. So I'm kind of just like, if I'm comparing it to driving, and I say I want to drive to New York, but I'm just going to head east, right? So as long as I'm heading east, I'll hit the East Coast and we'll kind of go from there. I like to know I'm heading east. That's what I'll say. But I don't think I would want to know exactly, like take route, 47 to this or whatever it might be. 47's, I think, in Long Beach, so you wouldn't be taking that. But anyhow, so I think a little bit of both, because I think you can miss some big ideas. I know for the middle grade novel, that was the first book I wrote totally blind. I kind of had a general idea of how I wanted it to end. I had a scene in my head of like the last paragraph, but I had no idea how we were getting there. And it was scary. I got to the desk every day going, oh God, how am I going to, did I just waste 100 pages and then 120, and then it would come like, oh wow, this is how, because then you're in the characters, like I was really one with my character's problem. Like, how do I do this? And I was thinking like the character all the time, and then I was like, oh, I know how we do this. There's only one way this happens. And so, that was a big moment. And I think if I had been wedded to some sort of outline, I probably would have written a book that would have been, maybe like Shonda was saying, easier to guess. I know though, I wrote a screenplay not too long ago, and for that I really needed an outline. It becomes like, it's a different exercise. You have a little bit less real estate. You have to end up at the same page count. Most scripts are in that. So, I know you write screenplays as well, and I'm sure when you adapted your recent book, you had to really outline what you were going to do for each. So, yeah, I think a loose plan with room for exploration, for a short answer to that.
I like that. I think I have a loose plan with room for exploration, but also the image comes first a lot of times for me. I'll be standing somewhere and it's like, oh, this is the story. And so the color of the day. And when someone, maybe I shouldn't start a story like that, but that's the impression of a thing, the impression of the story is what I want to have. So I'll just start writing first of all. I'll just maybe get out like 60 pages or something like that. And then I'll go back and start an outline. So the current memoir that I'm writing now, it's my Black woman's Eat, Pray, Love. Although my editor said, you're not eating a lot, you're not eating enough. So, but there's relationships, travel, and then angst, a lot of angst, which is that. But I realized that I had to go back and chapter my relationships. My first marriage was my throwaway marriage. I had to go back and outline that because I wanted to make sure that I was saying it, like getting what happened correct chronologically. And then my second marriage, which another divorce, that one was my longest relationship. But so much happened in that. Now I have to condense what happened. So I'm not writing, and then this happened, and then that happened, and that happened. So I'm actually now in the process of combining chapter titles that I had. And I said, no, these two can go together, and these two can go together, and these two can go together. So it's a bit of both for me. I never start with an outline. That's definitely, I always start with the impression of a thing.
Me neither. We outline, because I think the first draft is you kind of telling yourself the story as the writer.
That's true.
It's for you.
Yep.
You kind of need to put it out on the paper, have the confidence, okay, 15, 20 pages is done, this is what, and then now I can go in and now I can sharpen, like you were talking about the second story in the book. Yeah. That one was like, I told a loose version, now I think this can get a lot more interesting here, and here, and how do you make that ring true? So, I think that's good. What are you doing to fix the eating part? How are you going to?
I eat a lot though. I'm alive. Yeah, I didn't know I went to Italy. No, and I've traveled, and everywhere I go, I have Egypt. I mean, Egypt had this amazing food. So I'm like, okay, let me go back and insert that part, and then
That's good.
Paris has been interesting. That was interesting. The first time I went to Paris, I hated the food, so I'm right about it. Second time I went, I loved the food. So I'm writing a little bit about Malaysia, England. Was where I realized I was going to get a second divorce, and then where else have I been? Yeah, I know, right? That's good for the writing. Yeah, that was funny. Yeah,
writers are twisted.
Yes, we are. Wait until you see that book. So yeah, it is. It's a lot of going back to say, and that's a great piece. I love that you something just came that literally. So I had the draft. And then I did a list of things I needed to go back and add. So when you say, or how are you going to get the food in? And then I said, no, but don't forget this. Quickly do this, right? So I have a list of things that I need to go back and add to be the book that I want it to be.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Chris.
Other questions? Other cues? I have a question.
Sure.
What gives you angst as a writer?
A little bit the fact that I'm starting to feel like I want to write I don't even know how to say it articulately, but sometimes I feel like I'm writing the same stuff, you know? Like sometimes I get excited when I write a Mathieu Cailler story, but it feels a little different, or something like that. So I think that's why I switch genre a lot, and that makes me feel fresh when I write a children's story or some poems, or because sometimes if I write, if I'm writing short stories, I'm just like, am I writing the same story just with different, like, it's a priest here, but this guy's a PE teacher now, and it's like, he's talking about his love life or whatever. So, it's like I want to write a Mathieu Cailler story, but not be Mathieu Cailler, be adjacent or something. So I think that comes from just more life experience, or, because when you're new to writing and you launch on the scene, it's kind of like a stand-up comic. You have like all this material you've been building up, and you finally have a voice. So like my first book just felt incredibly fresh. And then I write a poetry book, and then you're just like, oh, I'm exploring similar themes that I'll probably be exploring my whole life. So I just want to make sure they're staying fresh, that my readers are entertained, because I think for me, the goal of my writing is to entertain, like first and foremost. If people get more out of that and go, okay, this is connected to me, I hope that's great, that's the next piece. But I really kind of see my work as like, oh, I've had a long day, I'm going to get in bed and maybe read a short story before bed. That's kind of like, a glass of wine, a cookie, a treat like that. That's what I hope. So, yeah.
What do you think? What do you? Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Follow up.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a Mathieu Cailler story?
I know that was kind of pretentious of me to say.
No, I love that.
Okay.
I love it.
I think I try to be very compassionate to people. I tend to love people and characters that are deeply flawed. I worked with a group of incarcerated men in Georgia State Penitentiary, and I just learned to absolutely love them. And what came through their letters was, no one's going to ever believe in us again, right? Like, you get to a certain point where you've committed something and you've committed some atrocities, and we talk about mercy, we talk about second chances, and then when I apply for a job, like, you check the box that says, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? And then all of that stuff goes like, thanks for coming in, and they put your application in the shredder, And so those stories, I think, still stay with me. I find myself attracted to writing about people who are, they have kind of the deck of cards stacked against them, and how do they break free? How do they get a little bit of hope? What brings them hope, right? I think certain interactions, friendships, even if it's like fleeting friendships or unexpected friendships, maybe with, people who aren't the same age or in the same place in their lives, those things can give us hope to live, another day and maybe get it right. And like I said, life is long, so there is a long path that you can correct. And just staying in touch with those people has really shown me the resilience of humans. They've inspired me a lot. So I think that, to answer your question.
That's I love that. I love that. I love that piece about the Mathieu Cailler story.
Yeah.
Will be a story with compassion.
I think so.
I like that.
I try to do that as best I can. Yeah.
That'll go in my book review.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you. How about you? What gives you angst?
Not having enough time to write. I get I need a patron. I'm like, Langston Hughes, who is your patron? Not having. I'm sorry? He did. Charlotte Mason or something like that, I think. Zora Neale Hurston, patron. You with the same patron, and so I'm like, I need a patron, like literally Oprah. I did. I walked to my mailbox today, and I was like, did Oprah send me a $10 million check today? Because, like, literally, it's not having enough time to write, and then that makes me procrastinate. When I think, I really need at least a month to sit down and do nothing but write the story like it's a job. And, and then I'm like, you won't have enough time to do that today. You won't have enough time. So I'm at the phase right now where I had to do the little by little. And I had to say, you're going to sit down and you're just going to do this section. And then you're going to stay in your bed. You've got a TV in your room. You're away from the kitchen. You're going to stay in your bed and you're just going to do this section today. And then when I leave here tonight, I'm going to do another section. So I had to do the little by little, like the repetition, what when you think you are trying to get a new muscle. Yeah. And I had to redo that because I have so many stories, that I want to tell.
I like that writing piece I have a hard time turning it off. I think it's good to give myself a break and all that, but it's always there, and I'm very agitated if I'm not able to write. And it's often the thing, sadly, that if you're very busy, it kind of always takes the brunt of it. So, yeah. Oh, do we have a question over here? Oh, yes. Sorry, the lights are so bright. There we go.
I think it's a question. I'm hoping it's not a statement. Listening to the presentation, I get a sense from you, Shonda, that there's like a lot of revelation of your Native American connection and heritage. Although obviously Native American is very diverse, so I'm assuming you kind of into your. Have you also pursued on the other end your African lineage and or influence?
So that's going to be the second memoir as well. But yes, I did my African ancestry DNA. A lot of people don't know that there's now an African ancestry company. Anyone could do it, because I believe that a lot of us have African ancestors on our tree. Maybe we just don't know it. Okay, so that was a sorry sidebar. To answer your question, yes, my matrilineal line goes back to the Mindi of Sierra Leone, and I cried when I got that DNA as well, because of enslavement, because I am the child of free people of color, who many of them were not slaves or were not enslaved, Black people, and we were related to people on reservations in North Carolina. So my people are the Kahari of North Carolina, Sampson County, North Carolina, Eastern Band Cherokee of North Carolina, Choctaw, they actually were forced out, but of Mississippi, Okolona, Mississippi, where my Choctaw come from, and then Delaware Cherokee also. So
well, the men, Sierra Leone, I don't know the history, but my understanding was that actually the nationality was kind of like folks that were kicked out of the UK, and Sierra Leone was kind of formed as like Libya.
Yep.
I hope I'm not mistaken.
Liberia.
Liberia was for America.
Yeah.
Sierra Leone was for the United Kingdom. So I'm just thinking that part of looking forward to your second book. I haven't read your first, I'm sorry, but I will. But it just seems like as much so as Native American is not monolithic.
Right.
I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
Neither is
the African
Black or African American or Negro or slave. That's not monolithic either. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how you're putting that all together. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, I understand that piece. Even when I got my DNA and it says, there's Nigerian, there's Senegambia, which Phyllis Wheatley was Senegambia. And a lot of people don't realize that Senegal and Gambia were one country until colonization forced it apart, right? And then the other piece about Liberia, this is a really interesting fact, which when I found it out, I didn't cry. I cry a lot, apparently. But my 6th great uncle by marriage was the first president of Liberia. So James Jenkins Roberts, who was adopted into the Roberts family. And my great grandmother is a Roberts. And so when I saw that lineage come together, I said, okay, even though it's by adoption, there's some kind of a connection there. So that's that piece, which is a whole nother book. But in terms of the knowing who those Africans are, I want to know that part. And that's me researching my father's story. The issue with my dad's story is I've only gone back 5 generations to Brad Buchanan, and there's no connection to Africanism, and there's no reference to slave or Indian on my dad's great-grandfather's side. And so now I need to figure out, was he a slave master, or was he actually someone who was, of color? So that's the beauty for me, that research piece. I fall down the rabbit hole, and I'm trying to find everything that I can around something. Thank you for that question. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes, like you did. I got follow-ups to the follow-up to the follow-up. So I know we were not here for that. But yeah, I did just double check. I started doubting myself. It's 1787, the British Crown founded the settlement of Sierra Leone and what was called the Province of Freedom, beginning a long process of settlement of formerly enslaved Africans in Sierra Leone. So
Exactly.
I thought so. I wasn't sure. But so it's interesting that your DNA swab revealed, but it could be, it may not have the whatever, I'm sorry, you mentioned somebody fell off. The European? And I'm just saying it very well could have come from the Sierra Leone side, as much so as it may have come from the United States, slaver or plantation, whatever. So that's all the more reason why, if we do the full circle on this thing, race is this construct that is very, it's interesting. I've been here earlier to listen to quantum and science and be here talking about race because it's,
the blood quantum is a really interesting piece.
I'm just saying the specificity. Specificity, I'm sorry, I implied that. The specificity is, it gets really loosey-goosey. So. And as you know, the relationships among the Native American tribes, and even to this, I think just 2018, 2019, I think the Freemen just settled a case in Oklahoma.
Yeah, because they disenrolled the Freemen. The Cherokee disenrolled the black freedmen. So the history is that those who fought on the side of the wrong side of the war, quote unquote, they were forced to enroll their black slaves into their nations. So some of them were the freedmen, right? And then the Cherokee disenrolled them, and they were like, they're not Indian, but they had already, some of them had married into the family or were participating in ceremonies, and then they re-enrolled them.
So the only point I wanted to make was that you mentioned the recency of all of this, and I think that it was just, I'm sorry, I'm vague, I have to Google it again, but I think that it was just 2018, 2019 that the legal case of the nations acknowledging and offering either, and if you know,
apology, reparations,
some financial compensation for the freemen, and it's just interesting to see that was as recent as 2019, because there was appeals for cases that were filed in the 1800s.
That's happening all over. That's happening all over Indian country, actually. Some of that is happening over there in Tule River, the Tule River reservations, and some of it's happening where some of the Chumash are trying to get some of their ancestral lands back here. It's happening in, Montana, a lot of the Gravon. I'm also adopted Gravon from the Aani people in Montana. A lot of them got their land allotments. So a lot of the Plains Indians got their land allotments, but there are some who are still trying to get their ancestral lands back. Oh my gosh, in the Hamptons, I danced at their powwow. It's gonna come to me, not the Cherenhawk, they're Virginia Cherenhawk, Nottoway, the Shannocock in the Hamptons. So they had to fight. I think last year or the year before, they finally got ceded some of their land, but they're still fighting for their land. It's happening all over.
The only point that I was bringing up in that comparison, and maybe you did, but I don't know the tribes you mentioned, but I was the blacks and the Native Americans and the kind of relationship and or I don't want to say confrontation, but the challenges in terms of black and Native American was particularly played out in terms of that legal case. And I just wanted to kind of say that,
And we can talk more after too, but I've got some of the 5 of the main texts that I use for some of that research in my book. Indivisible is one. It's a fantastic book. Black Indian by William Lawrence Katz is a wonderful book that talks about black and indigenous intersections. He was a great guy. He passed. And then so there's other books, but we can talk after. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Is he handing it back? Yep. Yes.
Okay. I apologize for being late to where I live. There's mudslides, so I have to go.
Oh my gosh.
We can't see anything over here, so we're good.
Sorry.
So I'm a songwriter, and this question is for Matthew. I absolutely loved your book.
Oh, thank you.
The way you tell a story and twist it, and then the end is just, I just was so engaged in it. Sorry if this is a repetitive question. If it is, just let me know. But in writing, we draw on life experiences or creative thoughts. And I'm just wondering where your resources, like how do you draw upon telling your stories and writing your stories, life experiences or what you're involved in, or craft versus different experiences? I'm just curious on.
Sure. Thanks for your question. Thanks for coming. That's a good question. It's a little bit like what Shonda said earlier about listening. I think I'm very intrigued by people, and it doesn't take me a long time to get intrigued by someone. And I, am quick to say, oh, that person's going to end up in a story somehow, some way, right? When I first was I was an elementary school teacher for a while, and then that became quite challenging to keep that job up with writing, as we were talking about with writing time. So I switched careers and was seeing students after school to give myself some more writing flexibility. And I was working in a gated community where this person was there. There was someone in this little booth 24 hours a day. So you had to check in and give your name. And I was like, oh, this fascinates me, this person that kind of watches this tiny little black and white TV in the corner with a donut, and kind of a really like a bedroom community, not much going on. I need to know more. So, it starts with that. I don't sit down and interview the person. Then it's for me to fill in what would be interesting, what happens to give this thing shape and plot, But I think, it's a little bit listening, being very curious about how humans live, jobs that are intriguing, someone who says something interesting. There's a lot of, we're just so many interesting people around, and everyone carries a backpack of pain around and this kind of thing. So I'm kind of curious what makes people tick, I think, more than anything else. And now, being older, I kind of reflect on my grandfather or people like that and think oh, what was his story? Or what was this person's story that was friends with him? And I can kind of fill in the details. So it's perfect to base it on someone and then tweak a whole bunch of stuff. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you. It's a great book.
No, thanks so much.
Lovely.
Thank you so much.
I have a question. It sounds like, I haven't read your book yet, but it sounds like you chose one side of your family versus the other to write the first memoir. And I'm wondering, you talked about a patron, and it sounds like there's this urgency. I know, well, at least I would feel that urgency, and I wonder, how did you make that choice, and how do you keep that balance, and how do you keep your kind of momentum and ability just to go to bed at night and then wake up again without saying, I have to do this?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Vocation, comes to mind. That old sort of Sidney Phillips. It's my calling, vocation. I have another mentor who says, I have another mentor who says, writers are blessed with a curse. It is the thing that we can't live without. It is the rendering of image or the actual storytelling piece, because it's needed either by the storyteller or by the listener or by the world. And when I think about this book in particular, writing this particular piece, I never saw a story, a memoir about a family who had the bi and triraciality elements. And then there was the piece of, why is my family that family? Like, why are they always like this? Why is that happening? There's got to be something in the past or something that makes us who we are. And that's what kept me going with the telling of this story. I said, I have to tell the story of my women. And I have to tell the story of, there's something that happens with my sister who raised me. I have to tell that story because it should not be forgotten, and who else needs to hear it? So I think that is the thing that keeps me going
past, being a single mom, raising my daughter, past, the jobs, where you've changed a job just to write. I got a settlement many years ago just to move. Actually, I was forced to move out of my apartment, but they gave me some money, like $17,000. And I was like, oh, I can write for 3 months in LA, on that $17,000. So I moved to a different apartment. And I worked on this book. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to sacrifice, take my daughter to school for 3 months, not work, and then work on this book. So that really helped me. And then it's just, it was like, okay, now you just need to keep writing. Even though you're back to work, you need to just keep writing and finish it and send it to an editor and then see what the editor says. It took a while for this to come out. Someone told me, I actually had it. I had an agent, Marie Brown, who was William Lawrence Katz's agent. She helped Black Indian come out. And Marie shopped it around and they said, it's a good book, but she doesn't have a platform. I was like, what happened to good writing? Like, is it good writing? Is it good enough? Would you take a chance on me? But no one wanted to take a chance. No one wanted to take a chance on that. So, and then I set it down and I went to AWP and I walked past AWP's Wayne State University Press table and I saw a sign that said Made in Michigan Writers. I was like, I'm a Michigan writer. And so I went to Annie Dillard. Annie Martin. I'm sorry, the writer's on my mind. And she's the editor of Wayne State. And I said, I've got a memoir about Michigan. And she said, you do? Well, send it to me. And I already had it queued up, nice, on my phone. And so I had her card and I sent it to her as I was walking away. So that's how this got into the world. She said, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question. Thank you.
So if this first book is called Black Indian, the second version, what would be the title? Do you have a working title?
I have a working title. There are two. So it's called Bend, Kick, Fly. Because I felt like in the first relationship I'm talking about that I was always compromising and just being malleable. The second book was a fight. The second relationship was a fight. So that's kick. And then the next one is fly because I'm no longer compromising and I'm moving towards my who I'm supposed to be no matter what. So bend, kick, fly. Whether or not that's the title, who knows? Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you.
Have you done sweat lodges?
I do.
And divinate, how about the African divination?
I do. I have my oyas. Yeah, oh yeah. My Ife, in West African tradition, which West African religion is not monolithic to the entire West African region. So the Nigerians have a practice called the Ife, I-F-E, and they have Orishas, which are different deities. And so several of mine, Oya, Yemenya, Oshun. And so those are my women. And then on my indigenous side, we do sweat lodges, we do other ceremonies, longhouses, sun dances, and I'm a sun dancer as well.
Part of the reason for asking was that the role of women.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you lined up with the female aspects of those Orisha and Ifa. And so also the Native American, that the role of the women, particularly after some of the Indian wars, shifted for a lot of the women and Native Americans. So you mentioned that, that's part of who you are, your identity. So,
I mean, I had to, because I would be called out if I didn't know that. If I go into Indian country and I'm just writing a book and I'm like, oh, hey, everybody, I'm here to sweat. And they'll be like, I'm sorry, we won't even talk to you. And even still, like, there are moments where, when I first started sweating, I started in California. And I didn't even talk about the sweat lodges, but I was quiet for about 4 years listening. And learning songs. One of the first songs I learned was children's Shumash honoring song. How does it go? Why is the Shumash? She's like, no, don't sing that song. Look, you can't sing me right now. And another one. So this is a mouse song. Hey you, hey you, hey you. So I was just quiet, learning like the traditions and the, talking about my people, and then listening to the elders and to the ancestors. And then when someone says, hey, can you sing a song? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll try. But, I've been listening for a long time. And then when I started singing, they were like, oh, you got a good voice. Okay, we're going to have you do this. And then I just kept moving and kept learning. And this is an interesting story. In South Dakota, there's a sacred site called Bear Butte. And it shares the border with two nations. So on one side, on the Wyoming side, it's the Cheyenne. On the other side, it's the Sioux, Ogallala Sioux. But there's a space that only indigenous people can go in to do ceremony. Like, you have to know that space is back there. And I was staying at one of the lodges, Redbud Lodge, and one of the guys said, you need to go down there and introduce yourself. And I was like, because it's like you have to be very respectful and very careful. So I went down and I was just kind of walking around, and everybody was getting ready for ceremony. And I went to a guy, and I know this isn't how it's supposed to happen. Women go to women, men go to men. But he was there, and I said, hey, my name is Shonda. My people are, I said who my people are. And the guy over there who's Ogallala told me to come down here. And he said, oh, he looked at me, go talk to that woman over there. And I was like, okay, let me go talk to the sister. So I went and talked to her, and she looked at me. She's like, yeah, okay, where's your stuff? And I was like, it's in my car. And so she could tell that I was a part of the culture by the way that I was communicating and acting and how respectful I was. So I went, got my stuff, and I was sweating, with them that whole weekend. It was very sacred. So anyway, that's a sidebar. That'll go into the second memoir as well. Yeah.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
The rishas that you named, they also have songs.
Oh, really? We're out of time. We'll talk. We're going to get to exchange information.
Yeah, authors will still be here. I'm pretty sure you're all welcome.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much. Thank you. We should take this on the road. Thank you.